The few people I've told this story to have always laughed it off or teased me, but I swear on my life, it's true. I have always loved yard sales. In the summer when I have a free day, I'll often drive around all day, looking for different yard sales. About 2 years ago I was doing this, just driving around looking for yard sale signs, gradually going further out into the rural countryside, having fun getting lost on backcountry roads. You can sometimes find great yard sales by doing this. I saw a yard sale sign off the road, next to a big rock that had something religious carved into it. I can't for the life of me remember what it said, God's Haven, or something like that. If a church group was putting this on, I figured they might have had a good selection, so I decided to go. I turned my new Jeep down the long, narrow gravel driveway, and the trees opened up to a clearing with a very beautiful white house. They have long tables spread out with folded cloths, kid toys, etc., but nothing that I was really interested in. There were probably 30 people milling about on the property, but they were all wearing these gray jumpsuits. Okay. The only other person that seemed to be there was an old man. The woman at a makeshift table with a money box on it begins talking to me as I was preparing to leave. I stride over to her for a friendly chat, and I notice that behind the house, there were 10 or so small buildings that the gray jumpsuits were going in and out of. After some casual small talk, she notices me staring. "Yes, we all live here. It's great. Would you like to come in and learn more?" She had this crazy flicker in her eyes, and I attempted to mumble some excuse. Then she nodded at 3 men who had been arranging stuff on the tables, and they all came and stood around me. "Really? Come inside. We preach peace and the Word of God. I think you'll really like it here." She took my hand and began tugging me towards the house, and the 3 men were sort of boxing me in. That's when the old man that I mentioned earlier took notice of the situation and intervenes. "Sorry, ma'am. We both really gotta get going now. I don't think she's interested." The woman looks shocked, but lets go of me, and the men in the jumpsuits step back. We both could have been easily overpowered, but the old man took charge and grabs my arm and hustles me over to my Jeep. As I was thanking him, he mutters in a low voice, "There's something strange going on here. You really need to get out of here." My hands were shaking. Everyone who had a gray jumpsuit on stopped what they were doing and were silently staring at us, and I'm fumbling with my keys. The old man was standing by my driver's side door. I was shaking as I started up my car. I tried to do a 3-point turn, but my Jeep slid down the gravel into a shallow ditch that was next to the driveway. I was panicking. "Just take it easy and use your 4-wheel drive," I whispered to him frantically. "I don't know how." I had only had that Jeep for a couple of months at that point, and I never had to use the 4-wheel drive before. He calmly instructed me how to do it, and stood there guiding me, as I finally got my Jeep to stop sinking into the gravel, and drove the hell out of there. I yelled back a thank you to him, and he nodded before getting into his own truck. I've told my family and a few friends about this incident, but everyone just sort of laughs it off. They tell me, "Oh, there's no cults in this area. It was probably a church group at one of the members' houses." But I have driven around that area since this happened, and I've never been able to locate that rock sign thing again. But to be honest, that day I drove pretty deep into the country. I really had no idea where I was or what road I was on. I just knew the general direction to drive in to get back to the main road, and eventually found my way back home. I think I may have escaped from a cult that is kind of off the grid, and I thank God that old man was there. Otherwise, I may have never been seen or heard from again. So this encounter happened many years ago when I was very young. I can't remember if the year was 2001 or 2002, but I would have been around 11 or 12 at the time. My uncle was interested in purchasing some land near Red Oak, Oklahoma. I don't know exactly where, but it was several acres in a very remote area. My father, mother, and myself decided to accompany him one Saturday to scope out the property. From our house, it was around a 3-hour drive, but we all loved riding in the car. It wasn't going to be the most eventful road trip. We just kind of tagged along to get out of the house. Upon arrival, I remember being very underwhelmed by the place. No houses anywhere around, and hardly any signs of life whatsoever, apart from a few birds. The wooded area wasn't exactly what I would call picturesque. Still, we parked our car off the road to go explore the forest for a while. My uncle was talking about buying the land for hunting, which wasn't really my thing. As we made our way through the woods, something felt off. Everyone in our group remarked about having an eerie feeling, but my uncle just laughed it off. My mother had goosebumps and kept looking over her shoulder, which made me feel on edge too. She was very insistent that something didn't feel right, like she was being watched, and wanted to leave right away. After a bit of hiking, I noticed that there was this small red shack. I had seen bigger storage sheds in the suburbs, but it looked well maintained. My uncle said that there was nothing about it on the listing, so we went to go peek inside. The door was already open, and inside were opened cans of food and a filthy blanket on the floor, and it smelled awful, like something had died in there. We all agreed it would be best to go back to the car. If there was some crazy hermit living in the forest, we didn't want to be around to encounter them. The only issue was we had walked pretty far into these woods, and now we weren't exactly sure which direction was the correct one. The eerie feeling from earlier really amped up, and we were all on edge now. We ended up trekking another mile before we finally found the road, but we were still further down from where we had parked the car, but at least we could just follow the road back now. While walking along the road, we came across a truly disturbing sight. Right in the middle of the asphalt was an animal carcass on fire. We had no idea why this would be out in the middle of nowhere, or how it came to be killed and set ablaze. Obviously, we hadn't seen this on our way in, so this had just happened, but there seemed to be no one around. Naturally, all of us were freaked out, so we ran the rest of the way to the car. When we got back to it, we noticed that there was a large scratch in the paint, from the hood to the trunk. Thankfully, that was the only damage done to the vehicle, and my dad was able to start it up without any trouble, and we drove away as fast as we possibly could. This was definitely one of the scariest moments of my childhood. Needless to say, my uncle ended up not buying the land, and like anything over time, I sort of pushed this whole event to the back of my mind. It became one of those odd stories you tell your family members at get-togethers years later. The reason that I'm sharing this now is because I was reminded of it last night while I was watching a documentary about a family that disappeared in that same area while looking at some land that was for sale. The Disappearance of the Jameson Family is the name of the documentary if you're interested. The family died under mysterious circumstances in the same area we were searching that day, roughly 7 years after we made that trip out there. There are many theories about their deaths, including the allegations of some kind of cult in that area, complete with some strange ritual involving dead cats being set on fire. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but there are too many similarities to ignore. Perhaps we narrowly avoided being murdered by some ravenous cult, lurking somewhere out there in those woods. Whatever the case, something definitely didn't want us there. I had always heard whispers from some of my friends in the First Nations about spirits known as the Tree People, which referred to trees with spirits or guardians residing within them. As fascinating as I found this, I always dismissed it as just a legend. Now, before you click away, let me be clear about something. This is a story about tree people, but certainly not the spirits of Native American lore. There were 6 of us out that weekend. Myself, my girlfriend Ashley, Eric, G.I. Joe, Mike, pro football linebacker, Jake, gamer/porn addict, and his girlfriend Jamie, pothead. We were camping in a remote region of northern Alberta. For some background, Eric and I are gun enthusiasts, and we were both carrying pistols. This was years before the Trudeau administration. We had camped in this area before, and had never encountered anything that would give us cause to use them, but you never know. I forget what Eric was packing, but I was carrying an MP446 Viking, which I'll refer to by its nickname, the Viking. Clever, eh? We arrived at the campsite around 8 p.m., just as it was becoming dark, so we had to set up camp in the near pitch black. Not a big deal. We just had Eric reposition his truck and aim his headlights at the campsite. Then got to setting everything up and starting the fire, etc. The campsite was located in a clearing, surrounded by a wall of trees. Past the tree line to the north was a never-ending labyrinth of forest. Ashley set up our tent further away from the fire, which was at the center of the clearing. We wanted a little privacy, you know. I remember watching the shadows of our friends cast by the fire as they walked about the campsite. It looked like they were dancing among the trees. It was then that I got that dreadful feeling, and I noticed Ashley occasionally pausing to look into the forest as well. She would later tell me that she thought she saw something out of the corner of her eye, darting between the trees. After setting up camp, I realized I had left my lucky Stampeders hat back in the car. Call me superstitious, but I never go camping without it. My car was not parked at the camp because on previous camping trips, my car had actually gotten stuck on the hillside leading up to the campgrounds, and I had to wait 3 hours for a tow truck to come out. Not to mention the bill was astronomical. So I decided to leave it in the parking area down by the lake. Eric wanted to check out the lake anyways, so we decided that we would head out together. We could have hopped back in his truck and drove down to the parking area, but it would have been a 45-minute round trip because of how the road was laid out. It would be easier just to cut through a small patch of forest on foot. Before leaving, we handed Mike a walkie-talkie and made sure that we were on the same frequency before setting out. Both my car and the lake were roughly 300 yards away from the campsite. As we were trekking through the darkness, I could feel that we were both getting a bit nervous. I don't think we realized just how dark it was out here. We then heard something moving through the trees close by. We both then stopped and listened carefully. After a solid minute of silence, we heard another disturbance coming from the opposite direction, accompanied by hushed, murmuring voices.
Cogedlo, 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 cogedlo.
Eric and I looked at each other, and even though we couldn't see each other's eyes, we knew what the other was thinking. All the horror and action movies we watched together had prepared us for this moment. We both knew what we had to do. I placed my hand on Eric's back, then whispered, "Go." He charged through the growth headlong, and I did my best to keep my hand on his back as we pushed our way forward. We broke out of the woods and into the clearing and made it to the parking area. We both put our backs against my car and pointed our pistols into the dark woods, expecting something to emerge. After 20 seconds, Eric finally broke the silence. "It sounded like we were being followed, right?" "Yeah, I think I heard voices too. We're not alone out here." I quickly called Mike on the radio. "Mike, come in. Did anyone else leave camp after us?" Negative. We're all still here. What's going on?
Shit. Listen, we think there may be someone else out here with us. Keep an eye out.
Copy that.
Eric then turned to me. We could just be overreacting here. Maybe it's just another group that's camping out here. I know you felt that back there too. I think all of us are in serious danger. I opened my car door and grabbed my lucky hat and also gathered a few other things while Eric continued looking for any signs of movement within the trees. I turned back around and aimed my flashlight into the dark. I didn't see anything, but we both knew we had to go back into those woods to get to camp. After 5 minutes of discussing it, we decided that we had allowed our imaginations to run wild. Eric had a point. Just because there was another party out here, it doesn't mean that we were in some kind of danger. But still, we had to be on our guard. Before we set out, I radioed to Mike again. Mike, we're heading back. Now is not the time to pull any pranks on us. We think there's someone else out here, and I don't want to accidentally shoot you.
Understood.
Flashlight in one hand, and the Viking in the other, Eric and I re-entered the dark forest. The walk back was nerve-wracking, but uneventful. At the sight of the campfire, we quickened our pace and eventually reached the safety of the clearing. While approaching the campsite to rejoin the others, that's when we heard it. A loud, thunderous chanting emanating from the forest all around us.
Morir es vivir, morir es vivir, morir es vivir, morir es vivir.
We saw everyone else at the campsite immediately look up. What the hell is that? Jake said. Mike stood up, looking to the northern tree line where the main forest was. Guys, look. Several dark figures had emerged and appeared to be making their way toward the campsite. Eric and I immediately drew our weapons, and I pointed my light toward the approaching threat. They appeared to be people dressed in what I can only describe as heavy camouflage. They all looked like a legion of swamp things coming at us. Stay back! I shouted, while aiming the Viking. I fired a shot at the ground in front of me, which seemed to halt the figure's advance. However, shortly after, we heard a loud gunshot coming from the distance, and a bullet hit the ground by our feet. Holy shit! Sniper! Eric shouted. There was someone hiding in the woods, with a rifle trained on us. That was a warning shot. We need to get going. I agreed, and addressed the approaching figures as we slowly backed away. Okay, we got the message. We're leaving now. We started gathering up what we could and loaded it into the bed of Eric's truck. The figures were now standing still, but appeared to be getting closer and closer every time I would look their way. Another gunshot rang out from the trees, which took out one of Eric's taillights. I think they're telling us it's time to leave now. We left our tents there. There would be no time to break them down. When Eric started up his truck and turned on his headlights, what we saw was absolutely terrifying. There were more tree people standing mere feet away from the truck. We were completely surrounded. There had to be at least 300 of them, standing in the clearing and in the forest. The scariest part was that none of them seemed to be making a sound. They just stood there like statues. The figures were not blocking the exit, so Eric carefully drove past them and made his way down the dirt road. I looked out of the back window to the campsite. The figures were now standing next to the fire, watching us as we drove away. It was a silent car ride. We all understood what had just happened, as unbelievable as it was. Thankfully, when we made it back to the lake, my car was still there, completely undamaged. Ashley and I got back into my car, and we followed Eric back out to the highway. We did report this to the police, but of course, nothing ever came of it. But I think I know why. I'm not kidding when I said there had to have been at least 300 treemen out there that night. If this was some kind of cult, it's reasonable to think that there may have been some connections with the local police. Also, they could have easily killed all of us that night. They had a sniper that could have taken us out. They could have stormed the campsite or blown out our tires. I think we were incredibly lucky to make it out of there alive. Who knows who those people were or what they were doing out there, but I'm okay with never knowing the answers to those questions.
There's always a reason to be afraid.